Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. So what I'd like to do is kind of just go over what are some of the basic things that you're going to need to know to solve the sine and the cosine function. Even though, yes, you can all go ahead and use your calculator and or computer system. Basically, when we're looking into graphing sine and cosine, well, especially with my students, I'm looking them to determine what is the main important characteristics, and as well as to show me some points that are on there that might not be as obvious just using a calculator, or be a little bit more difficult to use using the table function of the calculator. So some things that we need to know. First thing is how to evaluate on the unit circle. So you got to have an idea of what the unit circle is, as well as how the sine function and the cosine function, how we can evaluate for certain points on that function. Because basically what the graph for sine and cosine is you're going to have an input, which is going to be an angle measure, and then you're going to have the output, which will be the value for sine and cosine at that angle. The next thing is understanding like graphing functions. It doesn't matter what kind of functions we're graphing, quadratic, logarithmic. When we're graphing our functions, we have the input and the output. So noticing, and even if we're doing, forget about functions, what if we're just doing equations? You have the x and you have the y, right? So a lot of times when we're graphing these functions, the x-axis is going to be your input, which will be our angle, and the y-axis is going to be our f of x, which will be our output function. So just kind of understanding that input-output relationship, as well as x, y, if we end up doing graphing an equation. The next thing is understanding transformations. Now, when we're doing transformations for sine and cosine, I'll do the sine. We use this function, y equals a sine of bx minus c plus d. All right. Now, some other functions that you should be familiar with that we've talked about with transformations would be like the quadratic. Y equals a times x minus h squared plus k. So one thing to understand is, what does the a do to the quadratic? What does the h do to the quadratic? What does the k do to the quadratic? So if you have a basic understanding of what transformations do, not only to quadratic, but like an absolute value or a logarithmic, any of those different functions, the transformations, the a, h, and the k are usually around the same thing. And look at kind of the similarities. All right, a, b, c, d. We could easily use h and k, but actually what the variable is not important. Where the variable is within the function is what's important. And you'll be able to see as we go through this the similarities between these variables. Last thing is the fractions. One of the things that we do is solve when determining like a phase shift, how the graph shifts left or right. And a lot of times, we have something like x divided by 2, or let's just do 3x. 3x, equals, I don't know what I'm doing. 3x, equals 1, or something like that. But basically, we just got to remember, how to use fractions, right? When we're looking at fractions, just understanding the basic relationship of fractions, and then also using fractions to solve. Here I'd want to multiply by my reciprocal on both sides. That's going to make that go to 1. X would equal 2/3. So just having a basic understanding of fractions, they will be coming up quite a bit in this course. But there you go, ladies and gentlemen. That is pretty much the basics of what you need to know to be able to graph the sine and cosine functions. Thanks.